Shalom Aleichem. This is a tribute to Harav Chassid Rabbi Yerachmiel Stillman, a Shlichus of the Rebbe in California who passed away this past week. And while I'm speaking about him, I'm also going to share some ideas, some stories about two other California Shluchim who were friends of his, Rabbi Avraham Levitansky alav hasholem and Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz alav hasholem. And this trio, were what I call the golden days of California Shlichus, and I'll explain what I mean. Rabbi Reichik was sent by the Frierdiker Rebbe, by the previous Rebbe, in 1949 to Los Angeles. Rabbi Kunin was sent in 1966 by the Rebbe as the Merkez Shlichus, as the Merkez Shliach for the Rebbe and Merkez Liyonei Chinuch. And Rabbi Kunin started working with college students, and he needed help, and he brought out three shluchim. These were the first three shluchim of California. Rabbi Avraham Levitansky, Rabbi Yerachmiel Stillman, and Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz. I believe that Rabbi Levitansky still came in the end of 1960s. Rabbi Stillman came either in 69 or 70, and Rabbi Schwartz came in 1970 or so, 71. So they came at the end of the 60s to help Rabbi Kunin, and they were the three soldiers on the ground. Rabbi Reichik was Rabbi Reichik. Rabbi Reichik is the tzaddik, the Beinani, the Heilige, you know. He's from Europe. He's from Otfotsk. He survived the Holocaust. Rabbi Kunin is the director. He's the fundraiser. Although he made Bali Tshuva in the very early years, you know, families that today are full-fledged Lubavitchers, Zaydas, and Bubbas are his products. But nevertheless, he was occupied as the developer. And boy, did he develop. What you see today in California are all because of his hard work in those years. But who were the foot soldiers that he hired to help him with the students at UCLA? They were Rabbi Levitansky and Rabbi Stillman and Rabbi Schwartz. Schwartzy, as we called him. Stillman was called Shtul, and Levitansky was Levitansky, or Avremel. Avremel Levitansky ultimately was sent over to Simcha Monica. But in the beginning, he started there at Westwood. Westwood is where the Chabad house at UCLA is. And we know that the Rebbe told Rabbi Kunin when he gave him the key to the first Chabad house that it'll grow like a chain of supermarkets. So let me tell you about why I say that this is the golden era. You're talking about the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, going into the 70s. And why these three people? And personally, I came to California as a Bocher Shliach in 1981, but I was a counselor by in the Rabbi Levitansky's camp in 1980, I believe. And I observed him, and I spoke to him, and it was a tremendous Talmud Chacham with such bittul, subservience, such humility. You know, I could go into his house at 11, 12 at night, and he's laying on the couch with one phone here, another phone here, answering shilas of people around the world. I saw that. And then I saw him say l'chaim and fabreing, and I saw his varma hearts, his warm heart. At his levaya, which I wasn't at, but I was told there was like 1,000 people and all kinds of people. From frum to not from, religious, not religious, from Hasidim to Litvaks. Avraham Levitansky touched all kinds of people. Rabbi Yerachmiel Stillman grew up in Boston. He was born in Boston and grew up in Boston in the 1940s into the 50s. There was the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Boston First, Rabbi Castell ran the yeshiva, and then Rabbi Chaim Cement. And he was a student in this yeshiva. In his class, he had Rabbi Castell, soll sein gesund, and Rabbi Davidson, soll sein gesund. They were good friends of his. And these three boys were together from the very first grade, second grade, third grade to high school, through high school, most of high school. And Rabbi Stillman's parents, who I believe were from Russia, weren't, observant, and they wanted their son to have a Jewish education, regardless. And boy, did he have a Jewish education. And he gravitated towards the learning, and he became a serious Bocher student in the Lubavitch Yeshiva of Boston. And in talking with Rabbi Castell and Rabbi Davidson, they told me how he was very frum. And when they told me that, I remember when I came to California and I met Rabbi Stillman, who married Rabbi Chaim Meir Bukit's daughter, who was our Rosh Hashiva at Lubavitch Yeshiva, I saw a gewaltige frumkeit that I didn't see by many others. And I didn't know, is it real or not real, And here I am coming from Reb Melech Tzibul, Reb Yoel Kahn, the Rebbe, Chassidim, Crown Heights, and I meet this Rabbi Stillman. And I saw the way he davened. And I saw the way he pronounced the words. He would say the words clearly. And sometimes, if it didn't come out right, he said it again. And he didn't say it because it was a show. Or he didn't say it because he had a stutter. He said it because he wanted the word to come out clear from his mouth. I was told that he studied in Montreal, in the yeshiva, and then in Newark as well. The Lubavitch Yeshiva was in Newark. And he was there also as a chassan, as an older Bocher, and he was responsible for the younger Bocherim while he was there. And he was no fool, and he could have a good time. I mean, what do you mean a good time? I don't mean a good time partying when chas v'shalom, you're not supposed to. With the chevra, he was a chevra man, and he had a sharp tongue when he needed to, and bluff by him, I recall this clearly was the worst thing. And it's interesting, both by him, by Levitansky, and by Schwartz, this bluff issue by them was chok v'lo yavar, and which is Lubavitch, Chabad. The first thing that we were taught in Lubavitch, as Rebbe Chaim Karlbach said to us when he verbringt with us, and I mentioned in a previous clip, was to remove the nar from yourself. Don't be a bluffer, don't be a faker. Anyway, Rabbi Stillman would say a pilpul in Nigla. He was more of a Baal Nigla. And Rabbi Castell told me that the sefer that he liked was Rabbi Castell or Rabbi Nochem Krasniansky told me, the Meiri. He had gekocht in the Meiri ala Shas, the commentator known as the Meiri. But he said pilpulim in Nigla because the Rebbe had, made 7 kanim, 7 stars in Chassidus and 7 stars in Nigla, in Gemara, in Talmud. And he was one in the Talmud. But nevertheless, he davened barichas. He davened every day for many hours with great kavanah. So he was an oived. He went out on Shlichus. What was his job at Westwood, at UCLA? After Levitansky originally was taken by Kunin as the rabbi. Although Kunin was the rabbi, but the one who dealt with shilas and things and students, he moved over quickly. As I said, he moved over to Simcha Monica. So Stillman took over that. And for years, he was like the official rabbi under Rabbi Kunin for the students. And it's interesting to see a person who was on one hand, an Ovid and a Baal Nigla, and more serious is dealing with the students. In ganzens in the Rebbe's Arbeit. He dedicated himself completely to the work of the Rebbe, to the Shlichus. And then we talk about Shlomo Schwartz. He needs no introduction, Schwartzy. But Shlomo Schwartz came from Atlantic City and Baltimore. His father was a cantor. They weren't Hasidim, you know. And Shlomo was introduced to Lubavitch through Reb Itcher Springer. And he became a soldier, and he learned Chassidus, and he davened by Riches. And then he went to learn with a few others, Rabbi Bruce Wankin and the Lipschitz and a few others, I believe, to Reb Shlomo Chaim in 1967, 68, those years, because there's a letter from the Rebbe telling him and a few others not to leave, Langsam, a few others not to leave because of the fear of the 6-Day War and all that. So Schwartz learned by Reb Shlomo Chaim, and Schwartzy knew thousands and thousands of people throughout Los Angeles. He once told me that I don't do funerals. I only celebrate weddings. For a wedding, call me. I'll officiate. A funeral, go to someone else. He was a fun guy, but that was his chitzonius. His pnimius was he was a Chassidish Yid. And these three, Avraham and Schwartzy and Stuhl, they were the foundation that built Chabad of California during the late 60s and 70s, going into the 80s. If I told you that when there was a Purim party at Chabad House in Westwood with Schwartzy and Stuhl, I was there. It was unbelievable. And I'm not talking about the amount of alcohol being drunk. I'm talking about the togetherness, the love, the genuine Chassidishkeit that these people had to each other and to the students. Another thing that comes to mind, there was a weekly shir in Lekutei Sichos in either Frank Revere's house, he lived at the time, I think, in Westwood, or Harry Kreitenberg. These are Lubavitchers in California. And Stuhl usually gave the Sikha, and they would say a good L'chaim. And I remember once or twice they asked me they couldn't make it, they asked me when I was on Shlichus there for 2.5 years in the yeshiva in Arachon Chabad, if I can give the shir. It was a scene. It was like, once a week, you said good l'chaim, a good l'chaim, you learned Lekutei Sichos, and you fabrang together. And Stuhl was the one that usually was in charge of that event. There's a lot more to say, but I just want to conclude with one thought. And I want to, before that, I want to make myself clear. I'm not saying that post-1980s, there's no California Shlichus, Chas v'sholom. It only got bigger and bigger, and today it's massive. And everyone, kulam ahuvim, kulam berulim, kulam kedoshim. But the kulam peischem espiyah, the opening, who opened their mouths in the beginning, were these three foot soldiers, Avraham Levitansky, Yerachmiel Stillman, and Shlomo Schwartz. And it needs to be known. So when his neshama returns back to the Eibishter, Yerachmiel's neshama, he's the third of the three, right? Levitansky passed away, I think he was 66 or so. Schwartz was 71 or 72, and now Stillman at 76. It needs to be known what they did for Shlichus, for the world of Shlichus. What did they do? What did they do for California? They put the foundation Chassidishkeit. That's what I want to get across to the listeners. That the California Shlichus is miyusid on Chassidishkeit. Because these were real Chassidim with the bottom of hearts. And I conclude with the story I asked Schwartzy once. Tell me, how did you guys get around when you barely had a car? And if you had a car, it was a broken jalopy. So he said, let me tell you something. We had one car in the garage of the Chabad house at UCLA. The keys of the car stayed in the car, in the ignition. When Levitansky needed it, he turned the ignition. When Stuhl needed it, he turned the ignition. When Rabbi Kuna needed it, he turned the ignition. And when I needed it, I turned the ignition. It wasn't our private car. It was the Eibishter's car. It was the Rebbe's car. That's what I mean by a Chassidish foundation, and why these were the three individuals who were the golden age of the California Shlichus. May his neshama have an aliyah, a licht in Gan Eden, v'kitzer ranu sheichne ofar v'hu b'toicham, b'zoichet tebias Mashiach tzidkenu b'korav mamish, now, amen.